While Netflix has come under fire for canceling amazing animated shows, there's no denying that they've had a lot of great cartoons, with many great villains. And today, we're bringing them into our courtroom to have them answer for their crimes. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Sentencing Netflix Animated Villains for Their Crimes. Before we get started, while a lot of these shows focus on a main character who is themselves slightly evil or villainous, we're only tackling antagonists, but those main characters could be saved for another time. The 4 shows featured are BoJack Horseman, Big Mouth, Inside Job, and Dead End Paranormal Park. Alright, let's start with BoJack Horseman. The first villain is Jeremiah White Whale. Jeremiah is the owner of the White Whale Corporation, and a minor villain, mostly for Diane and Guy. Jeremiah is a corporate villain, like Lex Luthor or Obadiah Stane, where the crimes are mostly on a corporate level. These include abuse of power, which he does repeatedly just because he can. He runs a monopoly, which is illegal, and considering he owns dozens of companies and subsidiaries, it's pretty obvious. He then buys Girl Crush, where Diane works, and tries to silence her reporting of his companies.
They bought Girl Crush.
But the kicker is, of course, the hostile working conditions and manslaughter it leads to. And while this is a major part of the episode, thanks to the laws in the BoJack universe, he gets off scot-free. But that doesn't mean he gets away from us, because he definitely needs to get punished for these crimes. Jeremiah, despite his wealth, should get the full punishment, which of course is 20 years in prison with no parole. Next on the docket is Hank Hippopopoulos. Hank, better known as Uncle Hanky, is a public figure and celebrity who came under public fire, especially from Diane. During the tenure of his career, he seemed to keep his nose rather clean, beyond an implied award show rigging. Even this seems to be nothing beyond a theory based on how he said the phrase, "You can't beat Uncle Hanky." Hank's main crime seems to be his continued essay and sexual harassment of his many employees, associates, and assistants. This is a well-substantiated case, and while it's relatively unknown, the case against him is apparently so great, one can find info within moments of Googling. Hank continues to deny this had happened. However, it's clear that he did, and he crushes the story because the company that employs him also runs a newspaper who's going to run it. Hank desperately needs to be punished, considering that nothing happens to him in the series.
Are you seriously killing this?
It's just not a good time.
So, considering how intense and obvious these crimes are in the world of the show, Hank would be punished to the full extent of California law, which is a surprisingly low 6 years in prison. The final BoJack villain is Beatrice Horseman. Beatrice is considered the main antagonist of BoJack Horseman and is the mother of BoJack Horseman, who, throughout her many appearances, proves to be one of the worst people in the world. She's not the worst criminal we've ever tackled, but considering what she's done, she definitely deserves dissection. Beatrice was the heir to the Sugarman Sugar fortune, and after she gave birth to BoJack, she became bitter and annoyed by him.
You ruined me, BoJack.
This leads to her continued abuse and neglect. She forced him to do things he didn't want to do, mentally and emotionally abused him with her parenting style, and traumatized him for his entire life. One of her worst crimes happens towards the end of her life, which is when she continuously drugs Hollyhock with weight thinners. She does this without anyone knowing, and it almost kills her. Beatrice's only excuse is that she's suffering from dementia, but even then, she seems to very clearly know she's drugging someone's coffee, even if she doesn't realize it's Hollyhock. Beatrice is a very old lady by the end of the series, but that doesn't change that she needs to atone for her crimes. Beatrice's punishment is 15 years in prison. No matter how you feel about it, it's one of Netflix's biggest shows. The next characters on our docket come from Big Mouth. Starting off Big Mouth is Kitty Beaumont Boucher, better known as the Depression Kitty. She's one of Big Mouth's many monsters, working in human resources for the humans. In the series, she's mostly doing her job, but that doesn't excuse her criminal actions. Due to what her job entails, she's clearly abusing Jessie and anyone else she works with, literally laying on top of her to stop her from doing anything. This is mostly mental abuse, as she never physically abuses her clients. However, it does get to the point where she legitimately kidnaps Jessie and takes her to human resources. This is another form of abuse, as she then falsely imprisons her in the depression ward. She keeps her locked up and basically forces her to stay inside, and it is until she's distracted by a laser and a kick in the butt that Jessie is able to escape. Kitty repeatedly tries to coerce Jessie and others into doing things they don't want to do.
Fighting, baby!
This is her job, but Cat Stevens, who is another Depression Kitty, doesn't act like this, which implies that she does things outside the rulebook. Kitty's punishment is 15 years in prison with no parole, as her kidnapping is an A1 felony in the state of New York, where the show takes place. The next criminal is Tito Taylor Thomas, aka the Anxiety Mosquito. Tito is a major villain starting in Season 3, and like Kitty, he works as part of the Human Resources Division. Tito's whole deal is causing people to think about and become harmed by their anxieties, which tend to cause a lot of mental strain. However, considering none of the intense anxiety he puts into people is illegal, he only really has one major crime to discuss. That is, of course, driving people to self-harm and/or suicide, which is of course both assisted suicide and can also be considered manslaughter. We only know of one actual case of this, but it's a pretty high-profile case because it is the death of renowned artist Vincent van Gogh.
Remember Van Gogh? I feel crazy.
Now, it's mentioned that Kitty was part of this as well, but Tito seems to have been the driving factor. Because of this, he should be put behind bars for the rest of his life without any chance at parole. Next is the Ponytail Killer. The Ponytail Killer is an overarching villain in the Big Mouth universe, appearing in the background throughout the series, mostly in jokes and quick scenes. We are still unaware of his identity, but we know enough about his crimes to hypothetically punish him. The Ponytail Killer is named for his demographic of victim, specifically being those with ponytails regardless of gender expression.
Are you the Ponytail Killer?
As of current, we only know of 5 victims of this serial killer: a blonde woman, a personal trainer named Carol, a bus driver, a sorority girl, and Karl Lagerfeld. Due to this kill count, we can officially label him a serial killer, as one must kill at least 3 people over more than 1 month, which he very obviously has done. This means he would be on the line for serial murder, which is a pretty hefty crime. However, he would also be on the line for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, because he tied up and kidnapped the jogger he was intending to kill. If we knew his identity, we may have a much better and more accurate list of criminal actions.
I have proof who the Ponytail Killer is!
But as it stands, his punishment would be an execution by the state, likely by lethal injection. The final criminal for Big Mouth is Lionel St. Swithins, also known as the Shame Wizard. Lionel appears as the main antagonist in the 2nd season, where he inflames the inner shames of people and hopes to get them to change. This leads to a mostly non-criminal campaign, where he utilizes his dark magic to cause stress and shame among the children of Bridgerton Middle School. Due to his magic and role, he's able to unlawfully imprison Maury within moments. While most of the shaming he employs is perfectly legal, in the spin-off show, Human Resources, he plays a major role and commits a few crimes along the way. But the one we'll be talking about is Gavin, because at the end of Human Resources, Lionel is among the group trying to fix the tower damaged by the hurricane. On his trip, he essentially causes Gavin's death because he refused to do the things Gavin did and caused him to perish, which is of course manslaughter.
I'm simply of the mind that if I complete it, I'll die, so...
Lionel has allegedly done some other things, but as of right now, these are the big 2. Because of his actions, he gets 25 years in prison with no parole. Up next, we have Inside Job. We'll start with JR. JR was the head and CEO of Cognito Inc. during the 1st season. Due to heading a shadow government, he's done his fair share of crimes he can't be punished for. JR has been a major part of most, if not all, major conspiracies that have ever graced the internet, and is of course hiding this from all the governments of the world. He has committed acts of manslaughter through the things he orders and sends his employees on. However, while this is an issue, he's also brainwashed and tortured by proxy, not to mention the mutilation of the other potential Shadow Board members. What really takes the cake somehow is what he actually gets in trouble for: extortion and money laundering, both of which are done without the Shadow Board's permission.
I'm gonna get what's coming to me. The money, the house, the car.
Then, after he escapes from the Shadow Board's prison, he trespasses by hiding in Cognito Inc. This is a fraction of the crimes he's committed, as it's heavily implied he's responsible for multiple war crimes. As it stands, his punishment would be public execution via electric chair. Next is Robotus. Robotus, better known as Alpha Beta, was a creation of Regan Ridley, who was supposed to replace the president with a robotic puppet they could control. However, after getting into the office, he immediately abuses his power to cut America off from the rest of the world.
It's time to make a change!
After Reagan shows him the horrors of the internet, he suddenly gets much worse. He goes from being isolationist to full-on genocidal, as he attempts to nuke everyone he could, which means he attempted either genocide or populicide, depending on how you want to look at it. He hacks and steals a helicopter, of course being Grand Theft Auto and hijacking, so that he can continue his criminal actions. Of course, this isn't technically his fault, but he's also on the line for identity theft and impersonation, because he's designed to replace the living president. This would also be considered treason to a degree, as he pushes out the dutifully elected president to replace him. Of course, he also commits a few different murders during this time, and and, after being contained, tries to commit a multitude of jailbreaks. Alpha Beta is redeemed, but he still must be punished, and that would be a complete and total shutdown and dismantling, which is of course analogous to an execution. Rounding out Inside Job is Rand Ridley. Rand Ridley is the father of the main protagonist, Reagan, where he helped find Cognito Inc. Due to the fact he helps run a shadow government, it means he's skirting a lot of laws.
I'll do anything, even give him some of my stake in the company.
Rand attempts world domination on multiple occasions, even if he's too drunk to accomplish it. He commits animal abuse and manslaughter. He stalks his ex on multiple occasions and even, unethically, experiments on his own daughter, including erasing her memories of her one and only friend. He commits assault, including during his time as the leader of Cognito Inc., and he constantly abuses his power while in that role. In his past, he's responsible for intense child abuse, both mentally and emotionally, doing this repeatedly to his daughter when she was really young. Rand is a serial maniac whose list of crimes is genuinely massive, and he's only had 2 seasons to work with. Rand's punishment is public execution via lethal injection. The final show for the day is the canceled Dead End Paranormal Park. Starting off the section is the main antagonist, Pauline Phoenix. Pauline was the creator and curator of Phoenix Parks, but when she died, she ends up haunting this vain park made in her image. In the park, she committed a few crimes, namely in her goal to find a permanent new body she can use to continue her career. She commits multiple possessions, and this isn't a crime as it never happened to our knowledge. However, one can argue this is unlawful imprisonment and/or kidnapping, and we'll be considering it both. She later assaults the people coming after her and even attempts to murder them.
Gods, throw these traitors into the dungeon!
Sure, she thinks she's doing the right thing because it is what she wants. However, we can't in good conscience call it anything other than what it is: heavy criminal activity. Pauline has already passed, and assuming she could stay in a body long enough to be prosecuted, she would be sent to prison for 25 years without parole. The final villain of the video is the Watcher, who's a future version of Pugsley. The Watcher works alongside the Angels in their attempts to keep control when they can. However, he commits a variety of crimes just to show his loyalty. The Watcher works with a creature known as Fingers and seems to have been groomed into doing things. For the majority of the series, he's on the sidelines, but when he finally does set foot, he almost immediately shows his evil side. He murdered his version of Barney just to prove his loyalty, which is really messed up when you think about it.
Do you have any final requests?
He also abused his power and tried to kill the other version of Barney and his friends. He then also does commit treason by fighting back against his government. This punishment is pretty clear. He spends the rest of his life in prison. Alright guys, that's it. Let us know in the comments section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.